audience that are wondering, we will probably be working 67 on Thursday. That's the little deal. Today we have the budget presentations, and I'm going to turn it over to our person who's going to be reporting that to the committee, Vice Chairman Clays. The meeting's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start out by opening the hearing on the Kansas Department of Transportation budget. And committee, you've got a manila folder in front of you. If you go a couple of packets in, you'll find this one that says draft across it. This is the budget presentation. And we'll go ahead and start with Aaron Clausen, who will go through the budget presentation for the Kansas Department of Transportation. Take it away, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you should, just to start off here real quickly, if you're not familiar with the Budget Committee process, we basically go around and we'll have a Budget Committee report after we've had this budget presentation, go around to each of the members that gives a report of what has occurred. And if there's any disagreement to that, please let me know and we can work to figure out how that works. But like the Chairman had noted, you should have a budget presentation before you for the Kansas Department of Transportation. On page 1, you'll see the Transportation Department is a cabinet-level agency headed by the Secretary, who's appointed by the Governor, to coordinate the planning, development, and operation of various modes and systems of transportation within the state. Canada has the administrative and planning responsibilities for aviation, highways, public transportation, railroads, and even waterways, but has a primary focus on approximately 10,000 state highway system miles as per statute. The agency does have 5 programs which it accomplishes this mission: administration, transportation planning, and modal support, local support, maintenance, and construction. Now, to get you familiar with kind of this budget setup, on the top of the first page is the total agency expenditures under the agency's request, which is agency estimate and agency request, as well as compared to the Governor's recommendation for 2021 and 2022. On page 2 of the write-up that you have before you, you'll see I've listed that the agency does have a number of non-reportable expenditures, and in order to understand the better magnitude of expenditures that are going through the Kansas Department of Transportation, I've listed them in a number of the tables you will see. Essentially, a non-reportable expenditure, I think the best example is if KDOT buys gasoline and then sells it to the Highway Patrol. The purchase of the gasoline was by KDOT, and to sell it to Highway Patrol for their, patrol of the roads would be to double count that one expenditure within the state system of budgeting. However, this would, we record it as non-reportable because the expenditure did take place, but you can only record it once as an expenditure. I'll also note in the middle of page 2, I have state operations and capital improvements. A number of these operating expenditures will also include capital improvement expenditures because the nature of KDOT's position and responsibility involve capital improvement expenditures. I've also included on page 2 a brief summary of the last transportation programs by the Department of Transportation, inclusive of the Comprehensive Transportation Program, the T-Works program, and then continuing on to page 3, the most recent Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. I have outlined for you at the bottom of page 3 and continuing funds that were set out by the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program bill, but due to the nature of COVID last year and the sort of truncating of the session, no action was taken on these funds, but the Governor's recommendation does go in and appropriate these funds as no-limit funds for expenditure of the amounts of money that are transferred into them as per the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation bill. I'll let you note on page 5, there's an outline of expenditures that are anticipated to be made over the course of the Eisenhower Transportation Legacy Program from 2021 to 2030. The agency estimates approximately $1.2 billion in bonds to be issued over the course of this program. You'll note that on the bottom of page 5, continuing on, there's actually a 10-year history or a little bit more of actions that were taken by the legislature on this budget. Just as a historical record. On page 10 at the bottom, you will see budget summary and key points. These are actually a point-by-point little summary of what I'm about to go over in this budget analysis, so if you need to look back at it and see what happened, this will give you a quick summary. On page 13, The legislature did pass Senate Bill or House Bill 2739 in 2016 to provide a metric system called performance measures to try to analyze how the agency is doing, whether or not there are certain areas of improvement that the legislature would like to see. These are listed here as under the governor's recommendation for measures for the agency. On page 14 of this budget analysis, you'll see a pictorial representation of the agency's expenditures for the reportable budget over the last 10 years, as well as a numerical representation. There's also another breakdown which goes into further detail on page 15 of reportable expenditures, non-reportable expenditures, and then by major category of object of expenditure, which includes salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, capital outlay, and along the way there you'll see capital improvements, as capital improvements is something that we don't necessarily go into, but with KDOT, that's kind of a function of their agency. If that's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll continue on to page 16, which is where we'll get into the meat of the analysis. For the Department of Transportation, you'll see the table at the top goes into detail and says that the agency is not requesting any state general fund expenditures this year and are 100% special revenue funded. The agency had an approved level of funding at $1,584,000,000.4, and the agency, their reportable budget they're requesting in their revised estimate is $1.9 billion, all for special revenue funds. It is an increase of $268.9 million, or 17% above the 21 approved amount. Changes from the 21 approved amount by the 2020 legislature include increases in contractual services, other assistance, and capital improvements. These increases are offset by some expenditure decrease in salaries and wages, commodities, and capital outlay, as well as aid to local units of government. This is the first year of the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program and the continuation of current and planned project expenditures and reflects the agency's best estimate as to the project expenditure schedules. The agency's revised estimate includes 2,250.3 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 100.7 FTE positions from the approved number. The agency does note that the prior year's budget did include unfunded vacant positions, and this year's budget does not include any unfunded vacant positions. In addition, the agency has relied more on contractual engineering services to provide current levels of services under the Ike program. I will note here on the bottom of page 16 for your further review is the breakdown by major category expenditure for salaries and wages, contractual services, as where you'll see the increased expenditures for architects and engineers, as I noted, and commodities, capital outlay, debt service, aid to locals, and other assistance. You'll see all those changes played out. On page 18 of the analysis, we'll go into the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends 2020 reportable expenditures of $1.9 billion, all from special revenue funds. The recommendation is that all funds increase of $18.5 million, or 1%, above the agency's revised 2021 estimate. Recommended adjustments to the agency's revised 21 estimate include the addition of $100,000, all for the Driver's Education Scholarship Grant Program, which comes from the fund to fund that program. The addition of $17.9 million, all from the Special City County Highway Fund to reflect the most recent estimates by the November 20 Highway Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, as well as the addition of $10,094, all from the County Equalization and Adjustment Fund to spend down the existing balance within the fund. And the last addition would be for the addition of $500,000, all from the Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund to reflect expenditures for computers and other related equipment for teleworking, personal protective equipment, and cleaning supplies that were awarded by the State Finance Council in fiscal year 2021. With that, I'll pause before going on to 2022. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron, committee? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Aaron, I appreciate this. I'm going to ask this in every budget meeting. Why aren't we following the statute for performance-based budgeting?
If I might, Senator, please help me out with what you're referring to as far as the statute.
Well, if you would look at page 13, it specifically says in here that the legislative body passed House Bill 2739 in 2016 for performance-based budgeting. And what we got for performance was one page. And these performance measures, I don't think any business or company would come in and deem these as acceptable. I mean, it's less than a half of a page for the Department of Transportation.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, just to let you know that your concern is warranted and that there is basically the agency, these are kind of specific performance measures that were deemed by the governor to be those of particular review, but the agency does have further metrics that they have provided within their budget analysis. And within each of the programs that come later, there's a performance metric that goes along with each of the programs that they have, which might assist that somewhat.
Mr. Vice Chairman, and this is not what the legislature intended. The idea was so that we could see each program, how the program was funded, so that we could find efficiencies and duplications of effort. And we're not getting that from any of the agencies or departments. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Senator Pyle.
Thank you. Simple question. I'm curious as to why every page is stamped with draft.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just to let you know that basically during the creation of our budget analysis, we didn't have time to compile it into a full book, at which point the only thing that would change between this analysis and the final would be the pagination of the pages.
Aaron, another question, and it might go more to the FY22 budget, but I want to ask it anyway. There's some federal funds that are being drawn down, COVID-19 funds, and if it's in 22, just tell me, but there was an announcement of 84 million and 94 million, 9.1 million going to Casey and Wichita. Is that reflected in this budget? Or is that something that came after the assembly of this budget?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. This would come after the assembly of this budget, but there are some COVID expenditures reflected in this budget.
Okay, if you would highlight those, I'd appreciate that. I saw them in 21, but as we go forward. Any other questions, committee? For Aaron, just on 21. We'll move on to 22 now. Aaron, go ahead. Thanks.
On page 19 of the report, you should have before you the agency's 2022 budget year request. So in fiscal year 2022, the agency requests a reportable budget of $2.2 billion, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $363.9 million, or 19.6% above the 21 revised estimate. This is the second year of the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program and the continuation of current and planned project expenditures. The agency's request does include 2,250.3 FTE positions, which is no change from the 2021 revised estimate, and the budget increase is mainly attributable to increased construction expenditures. The agency's budget plans to let approximately $483.9 million in preservation projects and $642.3 million in expansion and modernization projects. The agency's budget, I've noted here just quickly, there's federal money as well as local aid reimbursements coming in at an amount of $414.4 million, which is a decrease of $50.9 million below the 21 revised estimate. I've broken down for you at the bottom of page 19, continuing on to page 20, the breakdown by program within the agency, but then also a breakdown by category of expenditure. For the governor's recommendation on page 20, you'll see that the governor recommends reportable expenditures of $2.2 billion, all from special revenue funds. The recommendation is an all funds increase of $335.7 million above the 21 recommendation, but a decrease of $10 million or 0.5 below the agency's 2022 request. Recommended adjustments to the agency's 2022 budget include, once again, the addition of $100,000 for the Driver's Education Scholarship Grant Fund for that program, the deletion of $10.1 million all from the Special City and County Highway Fund to reflect the most recent estimates of the Highway Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, and then as well as the reducing of the primary transfer from the State Highway Fund to the State General Fund from the 2021 approved amount of 133.7 million down to 66.85 million for fiscal year 2022. With that, I will turn to page 21. You'll see a breakdown of the governor's recommended salary and wage box. I'll note at the top here for fiscal year 2022, the governor is recommending a 2.5% state employee salary base pay adjustment. And if this is approved, it will be for distribution through the State Finance Council. I will note that also the salary and wage box includes breakdown of longevity bonus payments, which the agency is eligible for and has 2021 longevity payments of $200,120, all from special revenue funds, and for 2022 longevity payments total $205,040, all from special revenue funds. I'll also note here that in the governor's recommendation, the Kansas Public Employees Retirement System is recommended to be reamortized. Under the plan in 1993, the legislature let out for amortization of 40 years for the capers, and the governor's due proposition is to set for 25 years beginning in 2022 an extension of 10 years from the current plan. No savings for this policy are currently included in this agency's budget. Also, as part of the governor's recommendation, she's recommended a moratorium on employer contributions to the Kansas Public Employees Retirement System death and disability employer contributions. This is to be a one-year moratorium, and currently there are no noted savings for this. But this is basically in the governor's salary and wage adjustment. On page 22, you'll see a breakdown by category of expenditure, or fund rather, from which the agency's budgets are funded for 2022. Under the agency's request and the governor's recommendation, you'll see a prime area of this comes from the State Highway Fund, but has different expenditures from other funds as well. I will note on page 23, we have a pictorial and a numerical representation of the governor's recommendation. You'll see that construction makes up a large portion of these expenditures. Now, I won't necessarily go through each of the following pages, but you will see played out in each of the agency's programs, as well as performance metrics for each one of them, the agency's budget for 2021 and 2022. I will turn quickly, if you would, to page. Give me 1 second. Okay, on page 36, you'll see debt service listed. This is part of the construction program, but as it's something that's usually higher interest to the legislature, we've included here a breakout. On page 37, you will see remaining debt service payments by each transportation program, the CTP, T-Works, and then the total amount of debt service payments outstanding. Once again, reminding you that the Ike Transportation estimates $1.2 billion over the course of the program. And then debt service payments are at the bottom of page 37 in the current budgets. For 21, the agency is estimating $207,000.8, and the governor recommends that. The agency requests in 2022 $207.8 million, and the governor does recommend that as well. I will note that on page 38, there is a breakdown as a separate program listing for COVID-19 expenditures, at least in reference to the rural distribution of COVID funding, as the agency did run through the provision of this to rural transportation providers. You'll see on page 39 is a breakdown of the expenditures in the current, or the actual year 2020, the current year budgeted expenditures, and the governor's adjustment accounts for further awarded expenditures. And there is no estimate for 2022, but there may be further funding that is provided as per the time of this budget analysis compilation. On page 40, there's a breakdown, and even though it doesn't go through each of the agency's projects that they are doing, it does break down and relate information about the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, who likes to look at these particular details. For the agency, owns approximately 981 buildings, comprising approximately 3 million square feet. And the agency lists out here, as I've listed, projects the agency is doing for rehab and repair, re-roofing, sub-area bay modernizations, remote chemical storage bunkers, chemical storage facilities, purchases of lands, as well as the update of electrical bay extension and district shops, and the relocation of certain district shops. For the agency is requesting 21 capital improvements. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't know if you had a question.
No questions.
Okay. On the bottom of page 4, you'll see the agency estimates capital improvements building expenditures totaling $19.2 million, an increase of 4.4% above the 2020 legislature's approved amount. The revised estimate includes 14.2 in projects, 5 million in rehab and repair, and the agency states that this increase is primarily due to reappropriations of projects that were delayed from prior fiscal years. The governor, I've broken down once again each of those sub-area bay and organizations, the locations of each of those re-roofings, but on page 42, continuing on through that, sorry, it's on page 43. The governor shows that she concurs with the agency's revised 2021 estimate for building projects. For 2022, the agency is requesting capital improvements building project expenditures of $15 million, all from the state highway fund, a decrease of $4.2 million below the agency's 2021 revised estimate. I've once again broken those out for you on page 43 and 44. And at the bottom of page 44, you will see the governor does concur with the agency's 2022 revised request for building project expenditures. With that, I will make sure to note for you on page 45, we have a breakdown of the state revenue sources that go into the state highway fund, a history of that from 2020 to 2022 under the Highway Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions that you have or pass along to the agency. I believe that I can't see her, but I believe the Secretary Lorenz is in the room.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Research Committee? Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 19, you mentioned the increases in salaries and wages, and I was curious, does that include the state contribution on retirement benefits?
Yes, I believe if I understand your question correctly, does it reflect the governor's adjustment or does it include group health insurance and CAPER's death and disability payments?
Yeah, second part, latter. Does it include all the payment we make for all the benefits?
Except for the death and disability. Oh, yeah, sorry. That goes back in 2022. You're correct.
No, I want to know if this amount, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but I want to know if this amount includes those payments to like the retirement benefits, et cetera, that the state makes.
My understanding, Mr. Chairman and Senator, is that this does include benefits to employees.
Further questions, committee, for research before we have the agency present? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Would he speak to the FTE positions? How many of those are actually filled? How much is shrinkage?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I will have the agency speak to exact details, but as you see in the 2021 budget, there's a decrease of about 100.4 FTE positions because they were vacant for that time period. I believe the agency still has some vacant positions that they're hoping to have filled, but we can have them speak to that if they would be willing during their presentation.
Mr. Vice
Senator
Chairman.
Tyson.
Thank you. You also mentioned the State Finance Council for approval. Is that a normal procedure?
If I might, Mr. Chairman, it has happened in the past. It is up to the legislature to decide how that distribution would occur, but this is kind of dependent upon the timing of how things occur. If a bill passes post-session, the State Finance Council will be able to meet or call a special session of the legislature. That's kind of on the legislature's desire.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I have concern over that, but thank you, Vice Chairman.
Further questions, committee? Senator Pyle.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a request of the department. I would like to see a list, a compilation of all associations that, and maybe there are none, I don't know, but that membership dues and fees are paid to on behalf of employees or administration, salary, any, whatever. But I'd like to see a compilation of the list where they're paying membership and dues to. I don't need the amounts. I just want to see where we're paying for memberships. Thank you.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Aaron, yesterday when we were going through this, I noticed there was a transfer of 16.1 million from the highway fund for highway patrol aircraft. Is that reflected in
You're
this
correct,
document?
You're correct, Mr. Chairman. I will note for you also, there should be 2 documents that you were given by Florence that involve the transfers from the State Highway Fund. And one of them should be in black and white, and the other will include a little bit of color. But in the most current transfers, which are under the Ike program, if you have a copy of it in front of you, there's a transfer from the Highway Fund to the Highway Patrol for the purchase of aircraft of $16 million in 2021. Under the governor's recommendation, she does recommend the purchase of aircraft.
Thank you, Aaron.
Further questions, committee? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Just a quick question for Aaron, and maybe more appropriate for the agency. On motor fuels tax, I would have expected a bigger drop in 2020 actual with COVID and the pandemic and the number of miles traveled. I don't know if Aaron wants to speak to that or if I want to leave that question for the agency.
That might be a better question for the agency, Mr. Chairman.
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Any further questions on the FY21 and 22 budgets for KDOT for research before we move into the agency presentation? And committee will compile contact information for Aaron and for the individuals at the agency should you have questions after this committee meeting. Budgets like this are quite dense and require some homework, so if you have questions later, check your email. We'll send that contact info around again just so we make sure everybody has it. We'll go ahead and get started with the agency presentation. You'll have Joel speaking. Oh, the secretary? Okay, fantastic. Secretary Lorenz.
Good morning, everyone. Aaron, nice job. Aaron has presented good detailed information, so I'll cover the highlights today and particularly what's changed since last year. And this is the first summary. We'll start with the good news. On the highway side of things, our construction lettings are up by $136 million. Payments are up by $169. We're completing substantially more work, and we're seeing more jobs then flow through our economy through construction contracts. Our construction bid prices were down about 10% last year. I'll note, though, that when we saw the largest increase, not surprisingly, was in the March 25th letting. Contractors were bidding some of that uncertainty and risk into their bid prices. But overall, we've seen a 10% drop in prices. Now, this down $4 million on snow and ice removal compared to this time last year was set last week. This is an expensive week, so stay tuned for updates on what snow and ice is actually going to cost. In terms of staffing, and there were a couple of questions about that earlier. So what we have done is we have eliminated or dropped 100 positions. Of those, 67 were full-time, 33 were not full-time positions. That is a reflection of reality. We are not able to recruit and retain as many people as we need. I want to be transparent. If we don't think we're going to ever be able to fill those positions, there's no reason to keep those open on the books. So then what we do is we recognize by employing fewer people, it doesn't mean the work goes away. What it means is that we are going to have to hire more outside help. So we're probably going to have more contracts with engineering firms. We currently do not outsource maintenance work. We think that's most important, particularly snow and ice, to be done by our own crews, with the exception of Kansas City last year. We could not keep up with the pothole patching on 435 in particular, so we let a small contract to a construction company to take care of pothole patching. It is more expensive. than we would pay if we had our own forces to do it, but we don't have enough people to do it. I would also note that contract came in higher than we wanted to see it. They were pricing in some risk because it was the first time they'd ever bid that kind of work. I'm hopeful to see those prices come down in future lettings. However, on the other side of the ledger, as we do more pavement preservation work, we should see less patching required. This year, we have not had to let a patching contract in the Kansas City area, both because we're doing more preservation work. We haven't had as bad a winter. So you just have to take all those things into consideration as you think about staffing. Now, to explain a bit on this COVID-19 impact, where you see a $30 million increase, that's full disclosure, that's actually 29.7 million is actually money that's going to go to rural transit through CARES funding. So that's not really an impact to us, but I wanted to point that out as money that is coming to us from FTA and then is going to have to go right on to rural transit. We had about 500,000 in expenditures for COVID that were reportable. Of that, we spent about 300 on laptops and about 200 on cleaning and PPE supplies. Senator Hawk, I can always count on you for some good questions. Yes. You would have thought the motor fuels reduction at 37.5 would have been higher, and we were nervous. Last March, April, May, it was like, holy smokes. What we did see, though, is traffic start to rebound. In addition to that, we never really saw heavy truck traffic decline. We continued to sell gas for heavy trucks, and you can think about more and more Amazon deliveries and truck deliveries all across the nation. So the heavy truck gas tax kind of made up for the passenger vehicles. So I, like you, was very nervous, thought we'd see a higher decline, and we didn't. So that's what happened with that. All right, some of this is review from our KDOT 101, but it does underlie everything that happens in terms of budget. So how Kansas funds transportation. Those in the gray boxes are what we would consider to be protected sources. Those are funds that flow into the state highway fund and must remain there. The sales tax is the piece that can be removed and moved over to the general fund. I'll note sales tax does come, our portion does go directly to the state highway fund, and then it is, when removed, it goes to the general fund. We share, and when I say we, I mean like Kansas writ large, not KDOT, all of us, share with the counties and the cities through the Special City County Highway Fund. 2/3 goes to the state system and 1/3 goes to our local partners. So that's a quick view of how we fund transportation in Kansas. In terms of all funds revenue source, about 34% is sales tax, shown there in dark blue. About 25% comes from motor fuels tax, and about 25% from federal sources, making up about 1.7 billion. Our expenditure, all funds, is reflected here. In that you see by far and appropriately, our highest expenditures is construction. That makes sense. We then have regular maintenance, and when I say maintenance, that means things like mowing, snowplowing, that sort of thing. Local support, those are the local projects that we administer, followed by planning and money for the modes, and then by far the smallest is for administration of all those programs. This, and I want to say thank you to the legislature and to the governor as we see declining transfers, which means the Bank of KDOT is on track to be closed by 2023 if, you know, revenues and expenditures stay together and all those good things. I'll note, though, within that transfer, we have built in about 105 million that we consider to be ordinary transfers. And by ordinary, those are things that go like to the highway patrol, things that we expect. Some goes to revenue for collection of taxes, motor fuels tax. So we build that in. So we know, we count on that amount to be expended or to go back to the general fund. But it is through this decline in transfer that you're seeing more work being able to be done out on our state highways. And as it says here, stable revenues deliver more for Kansas. The Ike program, all programs under Ike are underway. I'm glad to report there is increased highway construction work, money flowing back into the economy, and we have projects now in the development pipeline, both for Ike as well as in preparation in hope that we see an infrastructure bill later this year. The new Ike programs do have implications on our budget, and that has been taken into account. So the new programs, things like 5 million for broadband, 2 million for transportation and technology, 5 million for the short line rail improvement fund. And then I want to point out this 100,000 for driver's ed scholarship. We have had, even in this really weird year in education and kids not being able to show up for school, over 1,000 young adults have applied for scholarships for driver's ed. So even in a weird year, this first year of the program I consider to be a big success, and I wanted to let you know that. Okay, construction lettings are increasing as transfers are being reduced. That is no surprise. What you see here in FY21 is 727 million in letting, so that's when we authorize work. Of that, you'll see 108 in expansion and 156 in modernization. I want to point out those are T-Works projects. We are committed, we made a commitment to delivering T-Works projects. One phase of every T-Works project must be let before we could start any Ike projects. It's nice to be getting the backlog of those projects off the shelf. All right, also you'll see here, so when you let a project, it normally takes 2 to 3 years to pay out that entire project. And you can see here, these are the payments, these are the dollars that are actually going right into the economy. It's estimated that for every dollar you invest in transportation, it reverberates or ripples through the economy 3 to 4 times. I want to say thank you to the KDOT team and to our transportation partners, both the engineers and the construction companies that have come together to help us get ready. Should we have a big infrastructure bill, I call it the stimulus prep team. Back in April, right as Ike was being authorized, we had 13 projects that were ready to go to letting in 1 year. We now have 50. So we are ready to go. And you can see there are 34 projects that could be ready by 23. That's what we had just, less than a year ago. And now we have 133 that could be ready to go. So I am here to say, if we get an infrastructure program, we're ready to go in Kansas, and it's due to a lot of work with partnerships. All right. Senator Clays, you asked about the 94 million. So I want to walk you through what we are doing with additional federal funds. First, under the CARES Act funding that you all are familiar with, KDOT received, and I've already talked about the 500,000, about 300 for laptops, 200 for PPE and cleaning. Under these flow through, these next 3 items, so about 38 million for transit providers. Of that 29.7 that I talked about, will expenditures for FY21. The remainder of that was in FY20. The 53 million goes directly to the urban transit providers, and the 53 million goes directly to Kansas airports. KDOT doesn't touch that at all. It's only on the rural side that we're administering the transit funds. So that's where we are in terms of CARES. Now for HR 133, so this is the 94 million that you asked about. So these were funds that were authorized at the very, very end of December, and we received the 94 million. About 10 million goes off the top to Wichita and Kansas City, leaving about 84 million. Of that, we thought through a variety of scenarios of what could you do with $84 million. Our first and top priority was to get that money into the economy to help bring back jobs and to help revitalize our state. So we're putting between 25 and 40 million into preservation work. We are going to increase our local partnership projects in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 million. So that can be local bridges, cost share, those sorts of programs. And then the 37.5, so Senator Hawk, this goes back to the decline in motor fuels tax. Of that 12.5, we're going to send to cities and counties because they share in that motor fuels tax, and they have shared in that pain. So we are sending it to them based on the formula that we use to share motor fuels tax all the time anyway. The 25 million that stays at KDOT will be used to make sure we keep our modernization and expansion projects that I just talked about, delivering our T-Works projects as promised, to make sure that those continue through our pipeline. And then I also want to talk to you or share with you this thing that I learned when I was in the recovery office, which is, so funds that come wrapped in red tape aren't really relief. We saw actually nursing homes that declined PPE money because there was so much paperwork that comes with these federal funds. So when I talked about sending 12.5 out to cities and counties, what we're actually going to do is we're going to send those out as state dollars. We are more capable of handling all the paperwork at KDOT because we have to do that more often. So we'll like literally keep the 37.5 and take 12.5 of state dollars and send it out so that our cities and counties don't have to do all that paperwork. I mean, we saw county clerks last fall that were trying to figure out how to have elections and do all the paperwork reporting and had COVID in their offices. And, you know, we can absorb the paperwork problem at KDOT and send them the 12.5 in state funds. So I just wanted to let y'all know that we are trying to be good partners with our local entities. So wanted to clear that up. And then last, because you know that cost share program, there are so many good stories to tell from it. And so I wanted to bring you the Peabody story today. So it's a town of 1,080 people. And their high school sits on Sycamore Street. And for years, the street floods a little bit in front, the sidewalks flood, are cracked up, there's water in front of the front door, the parking lot's a mess, and it's not ADA compliant. And for 5 years, the city's tried to figure out how to fix it, and the schools have tried to figure out to fix it, and the kids keep slopping through the water, and the sidewalks continue to crumble. And now with the local cost share program, they were able to apply for funds. KDOT's going to put in about $400,000. The city and county and the school district all came together to figure out how to put together $170,000. And now we're going to be able to fix the street, the drainage on Sycamore, have a better parking lot, and now the school bus is ADA compliant. And it is exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to do through this cost share program, is figure out how we can all chip in a little bit, and 5 years later, get something done. So last week I talked about Parsons. This week I'm talking about Peabody. But these are good projects that are really helping Kansans that we haven't been able to do before because those kinds of projects, there just was no way to fund them. And with that, I'm happy. And sometime if you want to talk about performance measures, I agree with you. Just last night, we have been working on better performance measures, and I was reviewing a new set of performance measures. I would love to come back anytime y'all want to hear, you know, but I also know y'all have busy schedules, but we are working on a much better set that will drive our budgeting. That's the right thing to do. With that, I'm happy taking questions.
Thank you, Secretary. Just going back to the 37.5 million going to the state and local budgets, the 12.5 that's going back to the cities and counties that you were talking about, is that based on a reduction that they were seeing of that exact amount?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So it's like, yes, replacement.
You're just simply replacing. Okay. Any questions, committee? Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate that. I knew you would be a leader in that effort, so that's excellent. I'd also like to thank you for the federal red tape. I've been saying this for years. I ask K through 12 schools, how much money is it costing you to get that federal money? And they look at me with deer in the headlights, but they are hiring people, they're jumping through hoops, and it's costing more than the actual money it is in some school districts. We need to be smart about the federal money that we do accept. I do have a concern, though. This happened years ago when federal money was dumped into K through 12, and then the money wasn't there the next year. And so everybody thought that the state cut that federal money, and it wasn't even close to true, or cut that money, but it was federal money that was cut. So is there going to be an expectation for us to keep up with that money in the parameters that we're doing it? And you guys may be able to handle your
I'm happy to explain how we are approaching this, because, the last thing you want to do is build expectations. That's the worst. So in the letter that we're sending to the cities and counties, we're quite clear, and we say, this is sort of like replacement revenue. It's one-time money that we got, and we are sharing it with you. And so I think Newton gets something like $50,000. Because that's their portion of loss. So Harvey County gets like 77,000. I mean, like, those are rough numbers. So I don't think that level of money I'm not worried about that level of money. What I would say is, and this is where we do need to be careful, as we take the bigger amount, which would be like 20 million into the cost share, for example. What we need to do is help communities understand this is, we're able to bump up this program, but we may not have that amount next year, but it's an application program.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I would also ask, I know you guys feel like you've cut to the bone. I would ask that you would revisit that with the state, because I am going to come in with some recommendations on all the departments. We need to be very diligent and very frugal, and I'm sorry, but $16 million in air, new air equipment, yes, maybe it's needed, but is it needed in this year? And same with the software and hardware. So thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
And typically, committee, the Kansas Highway Patrol is dealt with in the same budget committee as the transportation, but in this case, it's not. So that particular line item would have to be dealt with in the Kansas Highway Patrol's budget as well. Any other questions, committee? Senator Pyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary. This presentation right here, Peabody Street improvements, I just curious, they put blacktop over bricks. Who is they? Is that something KDOT contracted for?
Would have been the city.
The city?
Years ago. Okay, I should say, I assume years ago.
Okay.
It's certainly a
I was
city
curious
street.
because I would have thought there had been some liability if they didn't handle the water issues correctly and they didn't determine the drainage, doing that and causing another problem. I mean, I'm just curious as to who they is, but it was city government that paid it. Thank you.
Senator Hawk?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I did notice some other performance measures in the budget report on page 27 and 34, just going through here. And I concur with the concern about looking at those and having a better system, but it looks like there's more in here than a half a page, so.
We can do better.
But thank you. And my other question is on motor fuels tax. I saw on the back page on the capital outlay, which drew my attention to it, and I appreciate it on your slide. And at least in the capital outlay, you're predicting that amount will go down again in the 22 budget. What amount are you thinking is going to go down in the 22 budget? Another 37.5?
No, I don't think so. Traffic has rebounded. What I will tell you I'm worried about is the long term. And when I looked at numbers that project out to 2045, which we don't have to worry about 2045 today, but we need to start thinking about it, is what happens to motor fuels tax. GM just last week announced by 2035, most of their fleet is going to be electric vehicles. We have got, not today, but soon, to start thinking about how we are going to have sources beyond motor fuels tax. There is no question about it. When you look at 2045 and the percentage of our income, our revenue that would have to be motor fuels tax, we need to start thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Senator Diedrich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can we go back to those COVID funds just for a second? In many of our distribution of those dollars, you can't supplant or, you can't backfill, you can't replace. So how do you make that decision as you're going forward?
Okay, so
Is that an issue for you?
two things. The first tranche of CARES money that came to the state, it is not the same as the stuff, or as the money that came in at the end of the year. So the first money that came in, like the 1.025 billion or whatever, that came in with lots and lots of restrictions. This money that came in at the end of December is funded through a different bill, and it does not have the same restrictions. So we are, if I could brag, I know you're new to the committee, so I'll just brag for a second about what KDOT did years ago, is we were one of the first in the nation. We pioneered the federal fund swap program, recognizing, like on county bridges or whatever, for them to use federal funds, they're really high standards, and it's super expensive. We created this federal fund swap where we keep federal funds, we give state funds, and we charge for that. We give out 90 cents on the dollar, but it's still worth it to cities and counties because it's still easier to be charged a dime for every dollar than to have to do all that. So we have a system set up for that.
Further questions, committee, for the secretary?
Mr. Chair, more of a comment. Is it possible that I might make that?
Yeah, of course, Senator Pittman, go ahead.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to commend Secretary Lorenz. I know up here on K7, which is covered in slick ice today with lots of accidents, but the maintenance program that's been put in place throughout the Northeast region up here, at least in my neck of the woods, has been phenomenal over the last year and a half. So appreciate the maintenance work that you guys have done.
Thank you,
And we
Senator
look forward
Pittman.
to,
I'll also note, as I told Senator Peterson before we started, yesterday morning, I got one of those emails that makes you sick to your stomach when the subject line was snowplow head-on.
Yeah.
And luckily, what it was is that one of our snowplows was hit head-on, but the car slid in. Neither the driver of the vehicle or the snowplow driver were injured very much. And our snowplow's out of commission. But it is a good reminder that those folks, particularly in snow and ice, are putting their lives on the line. We had snowplows rear-ended frequently last year, particularly in the Kansas City area, because they drive slowly. So they really are essential workers, and they put their lives on the line, and they don't get paid very much money. So I appreciate your appreciation, and I always take that back to them. So thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We appreciate you being here today. We'll ask if there are any others who would like to testify in favor of or in opposition to the Kansas Department of Transportation budget. Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on the Kansas Department of Transportation budget for FY 21 and 22, and I will hand it back to the chair.
With that, we are adjourned.